It's 5 o'clock. I'm Fiona McCarthy. Decades after their relatives were forcibly removed from their Indian Ocean homes, many Chagossians have said they would like to return. Many settled in the Crawley area in the years since the US was allowed to establish a military base on Diego Garcia. Now, a British government survey of exiles has found that 98% of those who responded do favour some form of return to the islands. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office says ministers will now consider the results with a view to taking decisions on the way ahead soon.
BBC Sussex Drive with Sarah Gorrell. Well, our top story this afternoon, government research has shown a vast majority of exiles from the British-controlled Chagos Islands would like to return. Inhabitants were forcibly removed more than 40 years ago to allow the United States to establish a military base on Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. Many have since settled in the Crawley area of West Sussex. Steve Dale has this report.
More than 800 people responded to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office survey, asking whether or not exiles and their descendants would like to return to the Chagos Islands. Around two-thirds live in Mauritius, with 21% in Britain, some of whom live in Crawley. 98% backed the idea of resettlement, but most were not sure whether they backed various ideas put to them on how to resettle. The costs of the proposals are also under consideration. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office says ministers will now consider the results with a view to taking decisions on the way ahead soon.
Well, in a moment, I'll be talking to Crawley's MP, Henry Smith. But first, I'm joined on the line by Stefan Donnelly, who's Committee Chair of the UK Chagos Support Group. Stefan, thank you for joining us on the programme. Now, there were a number of proposals that were considered. What would most of those questioned like to see happen?
There were a number of questions put to Chagossians in the recent consultation, and as you say, the major finding of it is that 98% of them would like to return. As you also mentioned, there were different models under which return might happen, including a very small-scale, quite restrictive model, which would operate for a 2-year pilot, potentially then running into a more long-term settlement. And even for that option, there was a significant amount of support, over 200 people willing to go back as part of that pilot scheme.
This has been going on for a long time. Are you confident that as a result of this study, the support that's been shown for resettlement, that something will be acted on?
You can never be confident. As you say, this has been going on for a long time. There's been false hope before. But the government suggests that they had some questions about the level of demand for resettlement. I think those can be put to bed now. This is pretty definitive that Chagossians do want to go back and have a really pragmatic, enthusiastic attitude towards going back in terms of protecting the environment.
Can it practically work? It's been a long time. The thought might be there, the will to want to go back might be there, but would it actually work in practical terms?
Yes, in short. And there was a exhaustive KPMG study done into this, and even the government actually have now accepted that resettlement is practically feasible. One of the most interesting parts of this report, apart from those headline figures, is the list of skills that Chagossians had that could be used on the island. And those are skills in administration, in hospitality, in working around airfields like they do in Gatwick, which could also be used in the military base. So the skills are there, the enthusiasm for training is there. I think definitely it could be made to work.
Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme. Let's speak now to Crawley's MP, Henry Smith. Henry, thank you for joining us on the programme. Now, Jeremy Corbyn backs the plan for resettlement. He says it's time to put a horrible period of history to bed. Why has this all taken so long? It's been going on for a very long time, hasn't it?
Well, good evening. Yes, justice has really been denied for 4.5 decades. It was under the Wilson administration of the late 1960s that the Chagos Islanders were forcibly evicted from their homeland to make way for a US airbase. And it's been a sorry tale ever since. And I pay tribute to the government for, first of all, commissioning this feasibility study, an independent study by KPMG, which has now reported and says that it is feasible for Chagos Islanders to return to their homeland. Don't forget, these are British citizens who are removed from British soil and there really is an important point of principle that they should be allowed to return, and we now have the evidence that that is indeed possible.
So the evidence is there. When's it going to be translated into reality, though? Is that actually going to happen? We've talked about this so many times. You know, this is something you've been involved in for a long time. Are you confident that you'll see it come to a conclusion?
Well, yes, I mean, I first came across this story, this sorry tale, when I was a student reading about the British Overseas Territories, and I was quite shocked at the time that something like this could happen so recently in our history. And then about 14 years ago, when I was leader of West Sussex County Council, I was involved in trying to help the Chagos Islanders when they arrived in Crawley as British citizens arriving at Gatwick. And now, in the last 5.5 years as Member of Parliament for Crawley, the home of the largest Chagos Island community in the world, I see it's very much my duty to ensure that I am continually calling on the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to allow this right of return. There is a cost implication, of course there is, but we have a very generous international aid budget, and first call on that are the overseas territories, and I think that that budget, plus also asking the Americans to help with resettlement, they benefit from the airbase. They want to continue that airbase presence for at least another 20 years. So I think never say never, but I'm very hopeful. This is probably the best opportunity we've had so far.
The costs would be huge, wouldn't they? Can they be justified?
Well, the initial costs are somewhere between 60 and 70 million pounds, and yes, of course, that is a lot of money. But as I say, in the overall overseas aid budget, which is 0.7% of UK GDP, it's relatively modest. I think Washington can help as well. But also, this is a point of principle. These are British citizens who were forcibly removed from British soil. Were that to happen to us here in Sussex, I'm sure we'd want our right of return and think that was a cost worth paying.
Henry, thank you for joining us on the programme. Crawley MP Henry Smith there. The time now coming up to 14 minutes past 5 o'clock. Other news today.